I never thought of myself as the kind of guy this would happen to. If someone had told me 6 months ago that my marriage would be on the verge of imploding, I would have laughed. Sarah and I had been together for 12 years, married for 10, and while we had our ups and downs, I thought we were solid. We had a rhythm, a life built on shared routines. Mornings were predictable. I made the coffee while she got ready for work, kissed her goodbye as she left, and spent my day at the office, managing projects that I didn't particularly love but paid well. Evenings were spent on the couch watching our favorite shows, the occasional date night, and planning vacations we rarely took. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Sarah worked in marketing and had recently gotten a promotion that required her to attend more meetings, work later hours, and take business trips. I was proud of her. She had always been ambitious, and I admired that about her. But looking back, maybe I should have paid closer attention. The first sign was subtle, so subtle that I dismissed it as paranoia. One night, about a month ago, she was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen and saw a name I didn't recognize, Dylan. The message preview was just an emoji, a smirking face. I didn't think much of it at first. Sarah had plenty of coworkers and friends I didn't know by name. I told myself I was being ridiculous. But then there were other things. She started leaving the room to take certain phone calls. She became more protective of her phone, setting a new passcode even though it had always been open about that sort of thing. She started going out more, work drinks, she said. Then came the perfume. Sarah had always worn the same subtle floral scent since we met. But a few weeks ago, she started wearing something new, something heavier, muskier, a scent that lingered when she walked by. I asked her about it once, casually. New perfume? I said one evening as she leaned in to kiss me before heading out. She hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second, but it was there. Oh, yeah, she said, adjusting her earring. A friend at work recommended it. I nodded, pretending not to notice the way she avoided my eyes. And then there was that night. Sarah had gone out with some coworkers for drinks, which wasn't unusual. But when I called her at 10:30 p.m. just to check in, she didn't answer. No big deal. Maybe she didn't hear it. I tried again at 11 p.m. Still nothing. By midnight, my stomach was in knots. She had never stayed out this late without at least texting me. At 12:30, she finally walked through the door. She was smiling, a little flushed, but not drunk. Hey, babe, she said, kicking off her heels. Where were you? She blinked, as if surprised by the question. I told you work drinks. Yeah, but you didn't answer my calls. Her expression flickered just for a second before she rolled her eyes. I didn't hear them. My phone was in my bag. I didn't believe her. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. Her call log was empty. So was her message history. She had deleted everything. And that's when I knew something was very, very wrong. I didn't confront Sarah right away. I wanted to, but something inside me told me to wait. If I jumped on it too soon, she'd have excuses, explanations, maybe even tears. And then what? I'd still be left wondering, still doubting. No, I needed proof. Real proof. For the next few days, I watched. I paid attention to things I had once overlooked, the way she angled her phone away from me when she texted, the way she started wearing makeup just to run errands, the way she suddenly needed more me time. I started checking her car mileage when she went out. She'd tell me she was heading to the grocery store, but somehow, her car had an extra 20 miles on it when she got home. I checked our credit card statements. There were charges from places I'd never heard of, cafes, restaurants, even a hotel. And then, there were the phone calls. 3 times in 1 week, I picked up the house phone only to hear silence before the caller abruptly hung up. Once. A mistake. Twice. A coincidence. 3 times? No chance. I needed to know who she was talking to. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I did it anyway. I installed a tracking app on her phone. Sarah wasn't stupid, she cleared her messages and call logs, but she wasn't tech-savvy enough to catch a background app running on her phone. The app let me see her location in real time and record phone calls. For the first 2 days, there was nothing unusual. She went to work, stopped at the grocery store, came home. But on the third day, everything changed. She left work at 2 p.m., but instead of coming home or running errands, she drove to a small, out-of-the-way apartment complex on the other side of town. She was there for 2 hours. I stared at my phone, watching the location pin sit still on the screen, my hands clenched into fists. When she finally came home that night, I pretended everything was normal. I kissed her on the cheek, asked about her day, and forced myself to smile. "Busy day?" I asked casually over dinner. She shrugged. "Same as always." She lied to my face. That night, I played back the phone call recordings. Most were normal conversations with coworkers, a quick chat with her mom. And then, there was him. Dylan. His voice was deep, smooth, and far too comfortable with my wife. "Hey, beautiful," he said in one recording. "Can't wait to see you later." "Me too," Sarah's voice replied, soft, intimate. My stomach turned. I skipped ahead in the recording. "I wish I could see you more," he was saying. "Me too," Sarah sighed. "But he's been paying more attention lately. I think he's getting suspicious." He. Me. They were talking about me. I don't remember much after that. Just that my body went cold, my mind blank. She had been careful. So careful. But not careful enough. The setup. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. Every time I tried to breathe, I heard her voice whispering to him. By morning, I had a plan. If Sarah wanted to lie, I would let her. If she wanted to sneak around, I'd give her the chance. But this time, I'd be watching. I called in sick to work and waited. Sarah got up like usual, showered, put on makeup, too much for a normal workday. "I have to stay late at the office," she said as she kissed me goodbye. I smiled. "Okay. Don't work too hard." The second she walked out the door, I followed. She didn't go to work. She went straight back to that apartment complex. I parked a block away and walked, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The building was old, run down, the kind of place where people went to not be seen. I found her car, parked in the farthest corner of the lot. For 10 minutes, I debated what to do. Should I knock on the door? Should I barge in? Should I wait? Then, by sheer luck, the decision was made for me. The door to apartment 2B swung open, and there she was. Sarah. Hair messy, clothes slightly wrinkled, laughing as she turned back to him, a tall, good-looking guy in a button-down shirt, standing too close, touching her lower back as she stepped outside. They kissed. It was quick, but it was enough. Enough to shatter whatever was left of my trust. Enough to tell me everything I needed to know. Sarah got in her car and drove off, completely unaware that I had been just a few feet away, watching her betray me in real time. I stayed behind. I needed to see him. Dylan hadn't gone back inside yet. He was still standing there, looking at his phone, texting her, no doubt. And that's when something inside me snapped. I walked straight up to him. He barely had time to look up before I spoke. "So, you're the guy *ing my wife." Dylan's reaction was almost comical. His eyes flicked up from his phone, confusion flashing across his face for half a second before realization hit him like a truck. He took a step back, like I was holding a weapon instead of just the truth. I don't know what you're talking about, man," he stammered. I laughed, actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, come on, Dylan," I said, stepping closer. "You knew exactly what you were doing. I've heard the calls. I saw you kiss her just now. Don't play stupid, it's insulting." His mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Then he squared his shoulders and tried to put on some false bravado. "Look, man, this isn't what you think. Oh? It's not? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. So, you're not screwing my wife? He had the audacity to look uncomfortable, like I was the one making this awkward. She told me you guys were, not in a good place, he muttered. I clenched my fists. That was the excuse she gave him? That we were having problems? That made it okay? So that makes it fine, huh? I said. Just because she fed you some bullshit about our marriage, that makes it okay for you to jump into bed with her? Dylan sighed, rubbing his face like he was the victim here. Look, man, I didn't want this to get messy. It was already messy the second you put your hands on her, I cut in. My voice was dangerously low now, the kind of calm that came before a storm. Dylan glanced around the parking lot, like he was checking to see if anyone was watching. He must have realized how bad this looked, me standing there, fists clenched, murder in my eyes. You should talk to Sarah, he said, his voice softer now. This is between you two. I almost lost it. This was between us, I snapped. Until you got involved. He had nothing to say to that. Because he knew I was right. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to step back. Beating the crap out of him wouldn't fix this. I wasn't going to give Sarah the satisfaction of making this about me losing control. Instead, I smiled. A slow, cold smile. You know, I said, I'm actually grateful. Dylan frowned. Grateful? Yeah, I said, nodding. Because now I know exactly what kind of person she is. And what kind of person you are. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him standing there looking like the scumbag he was. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The confrontation at home. By the time I got home, Sarah was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't look guilty. If anything, she looked relaxed. Maybe because she thought she had gotten away with it. I shut the door behind me a little too hard. She looked up, frowning. Hey, are you okay? I didn't answer. I walked past her, straight to the kitchen, and grabbed a glass from the cabinet. I poured myself a drink, just to keep my hands busy. Behind me, Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Steve? I turned around slowly, leaning against the counter. You had a good day? I asked. My voice was even, calm. She blinked, surprised by the question. Yeah. It was fine. Lie. I nodded, sipping my drink. Work wasn't too stressful? She shook her head. No, it was, she hesitated. Why are you asking? I smiled, just a little. Because you weren't at work. The color drained from her face so fast it was almost impressive. I don't know what you mean, she said, her voice faltering. I tilted my head. You sure about that? Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then, finally, she sighed and set her wine glass down. Steve. I don't want to do this right now. I laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, you don't want to do this? I repeated, pushing off the counter. That's funny, because I sure as hell didn't want to find out my wife has been screwing some guy behind my back. Sarah flinched. It's not like that. Oh, really? I scoffed. Then how is it? She opened her mouth, closed it. Looked away. You're not even going to deny it, I said, shaking my head. That's all I needed to hear. She ran a hand through her hair, frustration flashing across her face. Steve, You what? I snapped. You made a mistake? You were lonely? You didn't mean for it to happen? She winced. Like she knew how cliché it all sounded. I don't want to fight, she said instead. Oh, that's convenient, I shot back. You didn't seem too worried about fighting when you were with him. Her jaw tightened. I was going to tell you. I lost it. Oh, screw you, Sarah, I snapped. You weren't going to tell me shit. If I hadn't caught you, you'd still be sneaking around, lying to my face every damn day. She sighed, rubbing her temples like I was the one giving her a headache. You're blowing this out of proportion, she muttered. I froze. Blowing this out of proportion. I set my glass down very carefully on the counter. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice deadly calm. I catch you cheating, and instead of apologizing, instead of admitting you screwed up, you're acting like I'm the problem? She sighed again. Steve. No, I interrupted. You don't get to Steve me right now. Silence. She looked away, her face unreadable. And for the first time, I realized. She didn't care. Not really. Not about me. Not about us. She had already checked out. I should have been angry. But all I felt was numb. The turning point. I exhaled, shaking my head. You know what? I'm done. Sarah frowned. Done with what? I met her gaze. With you. For the first time all night, she looked shocked. Wait, Steve, let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I cut in. You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine. I turned and walked upstairs, her voice following me. Steve. Don't do this. But I was already in the bedroom, packing a bag. I wasn't sure where I was going yet. But one thing was certain. I wasn't staying here. I threw clothes into my duffel bag without thinking. Socks, shirts, whatever my hands touched. My mind was running on autopilot, like I had been removed from my own body, watching myself from the outside. Downstairs, Sarah kept calling my name. I ignored her. I didn't trust myself to answer. This wasn't the kind of betrayal you just get over. A part of me wanted to walk out and never come back. Another part of me, a much darker part, wanted to make her suffer. I zipped up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. As I turned toward the door, Sarah appeared in the doorway, blocking my way. Her eyes were red, but not from tears. She wasn't crying. She was frustrated. Like I was the one overreacting. Steve, she said, arms crossed. Where are you going? Anywhere but here. She scoffed. Don't be dramatic. 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 I felt something inside me snap. I caught you cheating, I said, stepping toward her. I listened to you tell some other guy how much you miss him. I saw you sneak into his place like a goddamn teenager. And now, you're standing here calling me dramatic? She swallowed but held her ground. Look, No, I cut in. I'm done listening to your bullshit. You don't respect me. You don't even love me, do you? Her silence was deafening. She didn't even try to deny it. I let out a slow breath. Yeah. That's what I thought. I moved past her, but she grabbed my arm. Steve, don't do this. We can fix it. I turned to her, my expression unreadable. Fix it? She nodded, almost desperate now. I was confused. I was unhappy. But we can. I laughed, cutting her off. You weren't confused, Sarah. You were selfish. Her face twisted with frustration. You think you're perfect? You think this marriage was perfect? You stopped trying, Steve. You buried yourself in work. You barely even touched me anymore. There it was. The excuse. Like my failures somehow justified hers. I shook my head. If you were unhappy, you could have told me. But you didn't. You just went behind my back. She flinched. You want to know the truth? I continued, voice calm now. You did this because you wanted to. Because it was exciting. Because sneaking around made you feel wanted. Don't pretend this was about me. This was all about you. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I nodded, satisfied. Goodbye, Sarah. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. She didn't stop me this time. A plan for revenge. I drove aimlessly for a while, hands clenched around the wheel. Leaving felt good. It felt right. But it wasn't enough. Sarah didn't deserve to walk away from this unscathed. She deserved consequences. I pulled into a gas station, parked in an empty spot, and pulled out my phone. I still had the recordings. The calls. The texts. The video of her kissing Dylan outside his apartment. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the file. I could send this to everyone. Her friends. Her family. Even her boss. I could destroy her. She deserved it. Didn't she? I leaned back against the headrest, exhaling. My heart was pounding in my chest. Would it feel good? Hell yes. Would it fix anything? No. I clenched my jaw. Maybe I didn't need to burn her world to the ground. But I sure as hell wasn't going to just disappear quietly. I opened my messages and scrolled to Dylan's number. Then, I typed. Hope it was worth it. She's all yours now. I stared at the message for a long time before pressing send. A few minutes later, he replied. Dude, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed. Sure you did. Enjoy. I blocked his number and threw my phone onto the passenger seat. Revenge wouldn't fix anything. But walking away from both of them forever? That was enough. A new beginning? I checked into a hotel that night, barely saying 2 words to the receptionist. The room was small, impersonal, but it was quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, trying to feel something other than anger. I failed. Instead, I replayed every moment of our marriage, every stupid little fight, every time she said I love you while lying through her teeth. I thought about how I wasted 10 years on someone who didn't even hesitate to throw me away. I should have seen it coming. Maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't want to believe it. I ran a hand over my face. I had a choice now. I could drown in this, let the betrayal define me, let it turn me bitter. Or I could move on. Start over. Be free. I pulled my phone back out, scrolled to my lawyer's contact, and hit call. Hey, Jim, I said when he answered. I need to file for divorce. The morning after I left, I woke up to 22 missed calls from Sarah. I ignored them all. I had nothing left to say to her. At least, that's what I told myself. But a part of me, the part that still remembered our good years, knew that this wasn't over. Not yet. There would be one last conversation. A final meeting before I walked away for good. I just didn't expect it to happen so soon. Around noon, my phone rang again. I didn't even have to check the screen, I knew it was her. I let it ring. But then, a few seconds later, my hotel room phone rang too. I stared at it, my stomach tightening. She found me. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I didn't say anything. For a moment, neither did she. Then, softly. Steve. I closed my eyes, gripping the receiver tighter. Steve, please. Just talk to me. I exhaled through my nose. How did you find me? You paid with our joint account, she admitted. I just wanted to see you. Please. I should have hung up. Instead, I said, where are you? She hesitated. I'm in the lobby. My jaw clenched. She came here? There was a long silence before she spoke again. Can we talk? I almost said no. I almost told her to go to hell. But some sick, twisted part of me wanted to look her in the eyes one last time. Wanted to see if she'd at least pretend to be sorry. Fine, I said. 10 minutes. I hung up before she could say anything else. Face to face. When I stepped into the lobby, Sarah was pacing near the front desk, arms wrapped around herself. She looked rough. Her hair was messy, and she had no makeup on, something I hadn't seen in years. She was still wearing the same clothes from last night. For a brief second, too brief, I felt bad for her. Then I remembered the way she kissed Dylan. The way she laughed with him. And whatever pity I had evaporated. She turned the second she saw me, her face crumbling with relief. "Steve." I didn't respond. I just walked past her, toward the hotel cafe, and sat at the first empty table. She followed. The moment she sat down, she reached for my hand. I pulled away. Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. I waited. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She was the one who wanted to talk. So she could start. After a long silence, she whispered, "I don't want to lose you." I laughed. It was quiet, bitter, empty. Too late. Her eyes darted around the cafe like she was embarrassed, as if my reaction wasn't what she had prepared for. "You're really leaving me?" she asked, voice small. "Yeah, Sarah. I am." She sucked in a sharp breath. "But we what?" I cut in. "Had a good marriage? A strong relationship?" I leaned forward, voice steady. "Because if we did, you wouldn't have done what you did." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I made a mistake," she said quickly. "But I wasn't thinking straight. I was just..." "Oh, save it," I snapped, shoving my chair back. She reached for me again, desperate this time. "Please, Steve. Just listen to me. Please." I sat back down. Not because I wanted to. Because I needed to hear her excuse. Because I needed to know exactly how she justified ruining everything we built together. She swallowed hard. "I was lonely." I scoffed. "Right. And cheating was the solution?" She looked away. "I don't expect you to understand. But I felt invisible, Steve. You stopped seeing me. We stopped talking. I needed more." I shook my head, disgusted. "I worked late to give us a good life, Sarah. I came home exhausted, but I was still there. I still asked about your day. I still tried." She closed her eyes. "I know. Then why?" My voice cracked. "Why wasn't that enough for you?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, she whispered, "I don't know." I stared at her. She had no answer. No real excuse. Because there wasn't one. She just did it. Because she wanted to. I leaned back, laughing softly. She looked up, startled. "Steve?" "I just realized something," I said, shaking my head. "You never even said you were sorry." She froze. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. She knew. She knew that was it. She had one last chance to make this right. And she blew it. I stood up. "We're done, Sarah." She shot up after me, panic settling in. "No, wait." I held up a hand. "Goodbye." And this time, when I walked away, she didn't follow. The aftermath. The divorce papers were filed the next day. Sarah didn't contest them. She tried to call me a few more times. Texted me. Even emailed me once, as if we were colleagues instead of two people who shared a decade together. I ignored all of it. I blocked her number. I moved out of our house. It took time, but I started over. It wasn't easy. I had nights where I replayed everything in my head, wondering if I should have done something differently. I had moments where I hated myself for ever loving her. But slowly, the pain faded. And one day, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about her at all. That's when I knew. I was finally free. It took months before the weight of Sarah's betrayal finally started to lift. I moved into a small apartment downtown, away from all the memories of our marriage. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with mismatched furniture and a coffee machine that barely worked, but it was mine. It was my fresh start. At first, the silence was unbearable. No Sarah humming in the kitchen. No soft murmur of a TV playing in the background. Just me, alone with my thoughts. And that was the hardest part. Because even though I hated what she did, I still missed her. Not her, exactly. But the version of her that I thought was real. The one who kissed me before work, laughed at my terrible jokes, and curled up against me on the couch during thunderstorms. The wife I thought I had. But she was never real. She was just a well-rehearsed illusion. And once I accepted that, things started to change. The first steps. The first few weeks after the divorce, I kept to myself. Went to work. Came home. Sat in front of the TV but never really watched anything. My coworkers noticed something was off. I wasn't the guy cracking jokes in the break room anymore. I wasn't the first to suggest happy hour after work. I was just existing. And honestly, I would have stayed like that if it weren't for Tom. Tom had been my best friend since college. He was the first person I told about Sarah, the one who talked me out of driving straight to Dylan's place with a baseball bat. So when he showed up at my apartment one Friday night with a six-pack and a pizza, I should have known he wasn't going to let me sit in my misery forever. "All right, man," he said, dropping the pizza box onto my coffee table. "This pity party is officially over." I raised an eyebrow. Didn't realize I was throwing one. "You're literally sitting in the dark drinking whiskey alone," he pointed out. "Pretty sure that qualifies." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Tom, I'm not in the mood." "Yeah, well, I don't care." He cracked open a beer and handed it to me. "Come on. Let's talk." I took the beer but didn't drink it. "About what?" He shrugged. "Anything that isn't her." I stared at him for a moment, then let out a small chuckle. "That rules out about 90% of my thoughts." He smirked. "Then we've got work to do." And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely lost. Letting go. Time passed. Little by little, I started piecing myself back together. I hit the gym more, not because I wanted some dramatic post-divorce revenge body, but because I needed something, anything, to distract me from my own thoughts. I forced myself to say yes when Tom invited me out, even when I didn't feel like it. I reconnected with old friends. Got back into hobbies I had abandoned during my marriage. And slowly, the weight got lighter. But the real turning point? That happened 6 months after the divorce. I was grabbing coffee before work when I saw her. Sarah. She was sitting alone at a table by the window, stirring her drink absent-mindedly. She looked different. Not in a bad way. Just older. Like the past few months had taken a toll on her, too. For a split second, I considered walking out. Just turning around and pretending I hadn't seen her. But before I could, she looked up. And our eyes met. She froze. So did I. And then, after what felt like forever, she smiled. A small, hesitant smile. And I realized something. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel betrayed. I didn't feel anything. And that's when I knew. I had finally, completely let her go. Moving forward. After that day, everything felt different. Not overnight. Not all at once. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living again. And one night, while I was out with Tom and a few friends, I met Nia. She was different from Sarah in every way. She wasn't flashy or overly confident. She didn't play games or speak in riddles. She was real. We started talking. Then texting. Then seeing each other more and more. I didn't rush it. I didn't expect anything. But one evening, as we sat on my tiny apartment balcony, sipping beers and laughing at a dumb story Tom had told me earlier, I looked over at her. And I felt it. That's something. That spark I thought I'd never feel again. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself hope. Maybe this wasn't just the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. Final thoughts. Sarah and I never spoke again after that coffee shop encounter. She moved on, in her own way. I moved on in mine. I never found out what happened to her and Dylan. I didn't care. Because in the end, her story didn't matter anymore. This was my story. And I was finally ready to turn the page.